Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive Hobbycast. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not doing well, I hope you are soon. Alright, so today's topic is probably going to be a little of a quicker episode today. Today's topic is going to be Game Purge 2022, and I am just going to go down a pretty large list of games that I have sold over the past couple weeks and give a brief reason why. I used to do this on the video channel when we would kind of go through my collection, and I haven't done that this year yet, so I'm probably going to wait and hold off and do that at the end of the year. And so I thought I would do a quick video or a quick podcast here, just all about the games that I've purged recently. And starting off, all right. So the first one here is one that I recently did a video on, and that is Dawnshade. Dawnshade just did not meet my expectations. The main reason why I sold it is it relied on too many little dexterity mini games for me to have fun with it as a solo player. After that is Storm Vault, and that is from Games Workshop. So this was a reskin or retheme of a Lord of the Rings game that they did, and the main reason that I sold that is it really had almost nothing to the game. Almost no variety. You would basically see everything that the game had to offer in one play. It wasn't very attractive. There was just nothing to it for a Games Workshop game. Usually I like their board games a lot. This was really lackluster. And the reason I bought it, I found it on Amazon, I think on a clearance sale for maybe under $20. So I took a chance on it, and it wasn't even worth that. So next up is another game that I've done a video on, and that is Dauber's Quest for the Key. This is the game that has some very, very nice art. It looks very pretty. I love the look of the game on the table. I just don't think it is a very good solo game, and I can't imagine keeping it to play with a group enough times to make it worthwhile. I have a very small hobby room, and I don't have a lot of room for a lot of games, so I need to be really particular with what I keep, and Dauber's Quest for the Key just didn't make the cut. Next up is Hero Path with two of the hero expansions. Oh, it's hard for me to say anything nice about this game. You know, when you're a kid, and let's say you're on vacation and you want to go to a toy store and you're in some weird city, and the only toy store they have is one of those educational toy stores. So if you can imagine one of those educational toy stores, and just the way that things look in those stores, they just don't look the way things do in cool toy stores. They have a different color scheme and a different kind of look and feel. That is what Hero Path looks like. It looks like Talisman by way of educational toy store, and it just feels like such a relic from the 80s, but without any of the cool nostalgia stuff that old games bring. So yeah, just not a lot going for Hero Path. Next up is Siege of the Citadel, the Mutant Chronicles, and that is the newest one, the one that Kickstarter that finally got delivered 3 or 4 years late. This is a perfect example of just absolute Kickstarter plastic bloat. It came with so many minis in so many boxes. There was the documentation on how to incorporate all of the various expansions was lackluster at best. The game, I don't think they did much to improve the original game from the late 80s, early 90s. They did make all of the tiles and components bigger, so it takes up more space on the table than the old game, which is weird, why? And just when you're playing it, it's very simple, and I thought that maybe the simplicity would be a bonus for me, but in this case, it just wasn't. It took a lot to store, a lot to get to the table, a lot to set up and get playing, and then there just wasn't much there to entice me. Next up is a game that I wish I could keep, but the way the game plays, it needs more players, I think, and that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Change is Constant. This game seems like a pretty cool tactical skirmish game, and you can play it solo, but it has a mechanism where you roll dice. Each of the heroes, each of the turtles rolls, I think 4 or 5 dice on their turn. You set your dice up to do actions, and then the players to the left or to the right of you can use your immediate, your dice closest to them. So the dice, the die that I put in slot 1, the player to the left of me could also use that. And so it made playing solo very difficult because I constantly had to be thinking of 4 completely separate turns, but having them overlap to make good strategy. And I found it overwhelming to play as a solo player. And I just, 90% of my gaming time is done solo these days. So that is why that was sold. Next up is Warrior Knights, the Games Workshop edition. I had this, I bought this a couple years ago. It was unpunched, and I had this grand plan in my head to start playing Warrior Knights with a group of friends, on a monthly basis or so, because I really liked the Fantasy Flight version, and I thought that the Games Workshop version would be pretty cool. But once again, it just getting a group together that frequently to make games of Warrior Knights good just didn't happen, and it's absolutely not a solo game, and so that was being sold. And that brings us to the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, the newest expansion game for the Dungeons and Dragons adventure board game series. When I first heard of this, I thought it was a great idea. It was kind of billed as an expansion for all the games. And so I thought it was just going to be some new scenarios, some new monsters, new heroes that we could just plug and play with our other games. That's really not what it is. It's a kind of a short campaign style expansion that stands on its own, but you can use things from the other games in it. And it had absolutely nothing to offer except for the ability to take up space on my shelf next to Temple of Elemental Evil and the Drist games. I like those okay. I have them all in one box, and for me that's like the perfect amount of stuff to have for those games, and I could not justify the shelf space. And that leads me to Fury of Dracula 3rd edition, the Fantasy Flight Games edition. This is a great game. I love the game. But for those of you who know Fury of Dracula, you know that it is absolutely a 1 versus mini game. And I I cannot even remember the last time I played a 1 versus mini game. I don't like those style of games anymore. Whenever I play the game, I always ended up having to play Dracula because it's my game and I know the rules. But I think I would have more fun as a hunter. And so it just, I never got played. And that was my second copy of that game because I had one many years ago when I was more into those style of games. Played it and sold it, and I wanted to buy it again because I thought I would still like it. But my newer copy sat unpunched for like 2 or 3 years, I think. And so finally I said, okay, we got to get rid of Fury of Dracula. Next is, might be a surprise for some people. That is Chronicles of Drunagor, the first Kickstarter. And I recently canceled my Kickstarter for the new expansion. And that is a game that fizzled very quickly for me. I still enjoy the game a lot on the hero level. I think it is an absolute blast to play the heroes and their powers and all of the things you could do with them. What I did not like at all was the campaign system. Once again, it was a game that should have had, a series of just random adventures that you could go on with any number of heroes at any time, keeping heroes from game to game. But instead, they made this narrative campaign where you have to go through it quest by quest, and the campaign locks stuff behind how your campaign progress. So you can't even use a lot of the stuff you have in the game until you've progressed through the campaign. There's quite a bit of reading. The story was completely uninteresting. I mean, we played like through the 5th quest probably, and we stopped reading the story just because it was not very well written and completely uninteresting. And that's kind of my feeling on most campaign games these days. Next up is a little oddity, or I should say a big oddity, and that is Battle Stations 2nd edition. Now, I was told that Battle Stations 2nd edition was a or could be a solo game. And if anybody tells you that, it is absolutely false. In the missions, there are many passages of text that are supposed to be read by the game master and kept secret from the players. To play this game as a solo player, you are missing out on a lot. This game is also completely wild in the discrepancy, the amount, the differences between the base game, the introduction game, and the advanced, i.e. the real game. So when you open the box, the big box set that it comes with, they get to the introduction rules are like 20 pages. The advanced rules, where you are actually playing the game, are something like 500 pages. It is just an absolutely insane game to learn. It is a huge table hog. I would say avoid battle stations at all costs unless you have a dedicated group of sci-fi kind of role players to play the game with, and you have an absolutely massive table to do so. Next up is another kind of weird, or two little weird oddities from back in the day, and that is, I think it was TSR's Card Masters, which Card Masters was this kind of like card system for a dungeon master to kind of create dungeons on the fly. And it also has a little bit of a board game rules attached to it. Just none of these systems, none of the dungeons that it creates on the fly aren't very interesting, and the gameplay rules to play as a board game are even less interesting. And the next one is Valkenberg Castle, which was an older kind of portfolio style game, more kind of like a tactical war game set in a fantasy kind of castle setting. And that sat on my shelf unpunched for many years, and so I finally decided to sell that. That leads us to Zombie 15. Zombie 15 is a kind of an interesting game. It's a co-op zombie game where you are running through a city. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Dying Light in a way, where you're kind of like, you kind of want to keep on the move to avoid the zombies. The gimmick here is it's a real-time game set to 15 minutes. So you have a soundtrack that's 15 minutes long, and you try to play that. The problem with Zombie 15 is setting up the game would sometimes take longer than playing the game. Yeah, I don't like games like that. For my real-time, fun, just crazy game, I greatly prefer Escape from the Cursed Temple, which is a fantastic game for a real-time zany fun. Next up is Relic. So Relic is Talisman in space, and the only reason I'm selling this is because I had 2 copies. I ordered the game a long time ago from Amazon, and they accidentally sent me 2 copies, and they told me to keep one, so I had one in shrink wrap for many years. I do plan on getting Relic to the table for a video soon. It is an absolutely gorgeous game. It's a little bit like Talisman Advanced with some of the rules, so cool game. But I had a brand new copy in shrink wrap, so I sold that. Next up is another kind of oddity called Fantasy Paths, which is an older box set, I believe from the 80s, and that was another kind of dungeon creation toolkit that came with some very rudimentary RPG rules. And like Card Masters, the dungeon tiles aren't very good and the rules themselves aren't very good, so I had to sell that. Coming up next is Dungeons & Dragons 4th Edition Monster Vault, a very cool expansion to 4th Edition. I have a soft spot in my heart for D&D 4th Edition. I know most people hate it. I think it is actually, the rule set can be used to create incredible dungeon crawl board games. Played as a board game on the table, D&D 4th Edition is really good. It's not a very good role-playing game, but it is a great system for light, tactical, skirmish combat, and moving through dungeons. The Monster Vault is a very cool expansion that just comes with a monster manual and all of the standees you need to use all of the monsters in the expansion, and it's really cool. But I just don't play 4E anymore, and so I decided to let that go. Coming up next is Comanauts, the game from Jerry Hawthorne. So Comanauts is my least favorite game from Jerry Hawthorne. Of course, Stuffed Fables, Mice and Mystics, Aftermath. I love those games. Comanauts really suffered in the rulebook department, like a lot of the Plaid Hat games do. It is entirely, really, to me, unclear what exactly I am supposed to have been doing in Comanauts. The rules are there, and I know the rules, but I was unclear in how exactly I am supposed to be playing the game. It's a game that needs a little bit of direction to point the players in what exactly they're supposed to be doing from turn to turn. And it really fell flat for me for that reason. Even though I loved the theme, I loved the cardboard standees, were absolutely gorgeous. I liked the story behind the game, but I didn't actually like playing it, and I didn't actually like figuring out what I was supposed to be doing. Coming up next is Dawn of the Zeds, 3rd edition from Victory Point Games, a game that I wish I was a better game player. If I was, I would keep this game. It is highly tactical, kind of a tower defense style game where you're building up a town's defense against a horde of zombies. Like a lot of the Victory Point games, like Darkest Night 2nd edition, it's absolutely gorgeous. It has fantastic cards, a very crunchy game, but if you dig underneath the surface just a little bit, it also has a ton of theme, and the way the theme works with the mechanisms is really good. The thing is, the game is incredibly difficult, and I found it really stressful and just kind of frustrating because I'm just not good at it, and so that one is being sold. Coming up next is Hexplore Sands of Shurak. So I've talked a little bit about this before. I think they just added way too many systems to the base Hexplore system. I like the Dead King and Force of Adramon. Valley of the Dead King and Force of Adramon are fantastic. Of course, Valley of the Dead King being one of my top 10 games of all time. And Sands of Shurak just added too much. And they added so much that I was never able to get lost in the adventure. I was constantly trying to remember nuances of rules and systems. I did not like the 4 different paths to victory because I never really knew when to commit to one. It was a very stressful decision point that I did not enjoy making. And so I sold the game with its expansions. I'm really looking forward to the newest one, the new one that's coming out, that kind of gothic horror one, because they are stripping back a lot of the systems and making it a more simple and a more direct game. So that's why I sold Sands of Shurak. Next up is Fallout Wasteland Warfare with the Fallout RPG. I wanted to try to get into a kind of a narrative skirmish game. And so I thought Fallout would be a cool game to get into. The problem, once I got it and I figured out, and I realized that I don't really have any kind of terrain for that kind of game. So I bought the Skyrim Call to Arms game instead, because I already have some fantasy terrain and a bunch of fantasy miniatures. And so I just decided to stick with that, because that is kind of an upgraded, kind of an evolution of the Fallout system. So I have yet to learn either of the systems, but I'm looking forward to learning the Skyrim system. Another game is Adventure Tactics. So this is the game that I liked quite a bit. My review is very positive. I love the standees. I love the character building. The leveling up in that game is fantastic. It's really cool. The problem with it is there wasn't enough for me. It was just a skirmish game, and I need a little bit more. I need a little bit more exploration, a little more mystery, a little more to it. And so I knew that I would just never really play the game. Once I reviewed it and played it a few times, it just sat on my shelf, and it is a pretty big box, so it's taking up a lot of real estate, so I had to let that go. Next up is Pathfinder, the adventure card game. This is a game that, frankly, is just better with the app. Better in the app version. The app version is a lot of fun. The board game version I don't think is very fun, because there's a lot of upkeep. There's a lot of things that, as the players, you have to, not just while you're playing the game is there upkeep, but storing it and then sending it back out again. All of the decks of cards, it's hard to organize. The app, when you play the app version, it just takes care of all that stuff for you, so you can just kind of enjoy the game. And that's just the way that I would rather play Pathfinder, the adventure card game. And finally is another game that I have reviewed on the channel, and that is Shared Dream with all of its expansions. I went crazy for this game when it first came out. I blind bought the game, and then I went onto Amazon and bought all the expansions. The game sounded so cool. I thought it was going to be like just kind of like a lighter, dream-based Arkham horror style game. And it really wasn't. It really fell flat for me, especially in the art department. I mean, the graphic design for this game is just terrible. It looks like something you would find at like a Hallmark card store. I don't know. It's really bad. You go back and watch my video and you can see just how bad, how kind of just lame the game looks. And looks are very important to me in board games. You're staring at this thing on the table for 3 or 4 hours, and I want it to look cool. I want it to be enticing. I want it to grab my imagination. And there was just nothing about the way the game looked or felt with Shared Dream that did any of that. So that's why that was sold. And that was the final game. So that was Game Purge 2022, one of the biggest game purges I've done. I have a lot of new games coming in. One of them that just came in a couple days ago was Machina Arcana 3rd edition. I'm really looking forward to getting that to the table. That's going to probably be in another week and a half or so. I have a series coming out soon, a little a solo role-playing series with Morkborg, and then we're going to go into Machina Arcana 3rd edition. So I'm really looking forward to both of those things hitting the channel soon. And then as far as the podcast goes, the Hobbycast, I have something that I'm really looking forward to, and I may be the only one looking forward to it, but lately some people have been asking me to do some top 10s for martial arts films. And so I'm actually going to do 3 top 10s. I'm going to do a top 10 Shaw Brothers films, a top 10 like 90s wire-fu action cinema list, and then a top 10 other list. And in preparation for those top 10s, I am going to look through the huge stack of all of my martial arts films on DVD and VCD that I have, and just kind of like go through them and reminisce about the movies as I prepare my top 10s. I am really looking forward to doing that. I'm not sure if anybody else will enjoy looking. They're going to be released on the YouTube channel, and also I'm going to do like a video podcast, which I think I can upload. I'm not quite sure how that's gonna work out, but we'll figure out the details when we get there. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Hobbycast. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.